as the world teetered on the brink of global conflict in 1940. A generation of young Americans left behind the quiet rhythms of lumber mills, family farms, and college classrooms. They were pre-med students, aspiring artists, country lads, and class presidents. Many still bore the faint scent of high school dances and summer jobs. Inspired by the legends of aviators like Lindbergh, some had even built their own gliders, dreaming of the sky. But now, their futures, once clear, blurred like a dust storm on the horizon. Swept up by the ending Great Depression and the inexorable march toward war, amidst this burgeoning crisis, a radical vision took root in the mind of General Henry Hap Arnold, the future chief of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Arnold, a man who had himself battled a profound, almost primal fear of flight, struggling even to trust the machines beneath him, haunted by an unseen hand that seemed to turn aircraft over in the air, he became the unlikely champion of a new, audacious form of aerial warfare. He had overcome his own early struggles to become an innovative aviator, pushing the boundaries of air power at a time when the Army Air Corps was a shadow of its future self. Now, facing the unprecedented expansion of the Air Corps and its dangerously obsolete aircraft, Arnold saw an opportunity in the silence of gliders. And indecisive in precedent of the Air Corps and its dangerously obsoleted aircraft, Arnold saw an opportunity in the silence of gliders, envisioning them as a crucial component of airborne assault tactics capable of delivering troops and equipment deep behind enemy lines. The catalyst for this radical departure from conventional aerial combat came from Europe. German forces had shocked the world with their silent, precise glider assault on Fort Eben-Emael in Belgium, swiftly capturing the fortress. A year later, a similar, though devastatingly costly, air assault on Crete further underscored the tactical potential of motorless aircraft. These events solidified Arnold's conviction. On February 25th, on February 25, the 26th, and February Toxes of Outterby, 1941, the U.S. glider program was officially born with his order for a study of their capabilities. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941 then ripped away any remaining hesitation, accelerating America's entry into the war, and unleashing an urgent, desperate demand for all forms of military capability. Yet the nation stood with not a single combat glider in its inventory, nor any pilots trained for such a perilous endeavor. The question loomed, where would they come from? The answer lay in a chaotic improvisational scramble. The initial recruitment drive, despite its stringent standards and glamorous pitches, failed to attract enough volunteers. Faced with General Arnold's mandate for thousands of glider pilots by year-end, eligibility was quickly broadened, welcoming those with no prior flying experience and even power pilot school washouts. This opened the door to men from every walk of life, college students and farm boys alike, eager to serve, drawn to the unique challenge of airborne combat in aircraft that did not yet exist. The practicalities of training were equally haphazard. Early on, the lack of suitable combat gliders meant students primarily learned on graceful sailplanes, whose 30-to-1 glide slope bore little resemblance to the steep 9-to-1 glide ratio and terrifying sink rate of a combat glider. This created a profound disconnect, forcing pilots to master a skill set that would prove far more demanding and unforgiving in actual combat. An experienced pilot of motorless craft is used to having every landing a forced landing. One soaring enthusiast noted, hinting at the severe learning curve these recruits faced. The rush to arm these newly minted pilots with aircraft was a saga of wartime urgency and industrial chaos. The CG-4A, a 15-place flying tent designed to carry troops or a jeep, was quickly put into production, but the scale of demand led to a fragmented manufacturing effort involving 16 companies and hundreds of subcontractors. These were often inexperienced manufacturers previously making items like coffins, refrigerators, food condiments, and pianos, now tasked with assembling 70,000 component parts into an aircraft. The gliders, cobbled together from tubular steel, wood, and fabric, were sometimes of such poor design and workmanship that they proved as deadly as the Germans. This was the crucible in which a new breed of pilot was forged, the Sherpas of World War II, as they were called, tasked with carrying the burden of war into the heart of enemy territory. These air corps tasked with carrying the burden of war into the heart of enemy territory, skinned with fabric but carry no guns, no engines, and no second chances, quickly earned grim nicknames like flying coffins, tow targets, death crates, puke ships, plywood hearses, purple heart box, and flying box kite. The inherent danger was undeniable, an expected 50% casualty rate on these one-way missions made even routine training flights deadly. Pilots felt helpless as a duck flying in hunting season, vulnerable to every threat. Glider warfare, in essence, was largely invented from one invasion to the next, a constant, perilous evolution demanding immense courage and adaptability in the face of technical, organizational, and attitudinal challenges. The Sicilian night had offered a brutal, unforgiving baptism. What was conceived as a silent, stealthy insertion of vital troops and equipment into enemy territory had, for many, devolved into a deadly debacle in the churning waters off the coast. As the last flares faded and the roar of retreating tow planes diminished, the ocean became a vast, dark expanse of terror and despair, littered with the wreckage of gliders, dead creatures bobbing in the swells. For the glider pilots, the command to release the tow rope often came with a sickening certainty. You either release now or we're going to release you. For men like Michael Simek and his British counterpart, Vic Taylor, the decision was less a choice than an acceptance of the inevitable. Buffeted by gale-force winds, blinded by cloud cover, and facing a black featureless sea instead of a landing zone, the pilots knew their primary duty now was to give their troops a fighting chance to survive the inevitable ditching. There was no glory in this moment, only a grim, immediate calculation: release the glider, brace for impact, and hope. The sudden silence that followed the tow rope snap was deafening, a stark prelude to the violent collision with the waves. The scale of the catastrophe was staggering. Hundreds of glider pilots and airborne troops were lost, many swallowed by the sea, their fates unknown. Families back home would receive terse telegrams, while newspaper headlines, designed to boost morale, offered a starkly sanitized version of the truth, often downplaying the grim reality of the glider graveyard. The disaster ignited a fierce, immediate debate within Allied command, casting a heavy shadow over the entire concept of large-scale airborne assaults. General Eisenhower himself questioned their wisdom, and General Arnold's ambitious glider vision seemed to be mired in an unshakable fog of doubt. The anger and resentment among survivors, particularly over friendly fire incidents from Allied naval forces, fueled a profound disillusionment, with some, like Michael Samaki, refusing to wear their medals in protest. The immediate bravery of pilots like Samuel Fine, whose Silver Star recommendation was rejected by General Mark Clark, underscored a troubling lack of recognition for their harrowing experiences. Yet, amidst the widespread failure, pockets of extraordinary courage emerged, offering a glimmer of hope. A small group of glider-borne troops, including American Flight Officer Samuel Fine, American glider pilots Morris Kyle and Russell Parks, and their British comrades, managed to make landfall and secure the crucial Ponte Grande Bridge. This isolated act of defiance, holding the bridge against fierce counterattacks, demonstrated the potential value of glider-borne troops, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was from this desperate stand that glider pilots would earn their enduring nickname, G for Guts. The severe losses of Operation Ladbroke, though paid in blood and despair, served as a brutal, undeniable catalyst for reform. An American investigation in September produced urgent recommendations, and a series of conferences culminated in a drastic overhaul of the glider pilot program. Training was consolidated, flight time significantly increased, and a combat-focused regimen was implemented, demanding that pilots be not of conferences. Navy Didakolb, and the drastic consecutive flight time significantly increased. The program, initially swollen with thousands of recruits, was drastically culled, leaving less than 2,000 pilots from the nearly 9,000 initially recruited. This critical examination spurred vital innovations. The Griswold nose, a steel truss structure resembling a train's cowcatcher, was designed to improve glider survivability by absorbing energy and deflecting obstacles upon landing. Stunt pilot Major Mike Murphy developed new landing techniques, emphasizing slower, more controlled approaches to enable combat landings within tight, obstructed zones. The program's credibility, shaken by Sicily, was dramatically restored in late 1943 with the P-Patch show demonstration in North Carolina, where 22 gliders landed stealthily under the cover of a moonless night. their unexpected appearance revealed by floodlights to skeptical high-level officers, including General Hap Arnold. These bitter lessons forged in the disaster of Sicily would fundamentally reshape glider training, tactics, and equipment, laying the groundwork for future operations, including the massive D-Day invasion. Glider warfare, it was clear, was not a static doctrine, but a brutal, evolving craft, often invented from one invasion to the next, and Sicily had been its first, most unforgiving workshop. The United States glider program, born of desperate necessity and nurtured through chaos, arrived at the shores of Normandy, not as a polished military marvel, but as a collection of piecemeal solutions and hard-won lessons. Early design flaws, from structural tail failures to wing detachments, had repeatedly grounded the fleet, casting a long shadow over its viability. Catastrophic crashes like the St. Louis incident in August 1943 had placed the entire concept under intense scrutiny. Yet, through sheer force of will and a relentless pursuit of improvement, innovations like the Griswold nose had emerged, a steel truss designed to absorb impact and improve survivability as small besides, and emerged to their dissonant aside. The P. Pat Show demonstration, where gliders materialized silently from a moonless night, had, for a fleeting moment, convinced skeptical generals like Leslie McNair that these flying coffins held strategic value. But as D-Day loomed, the prevailing sentiment voiced by figures like Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Lee Mallory remained grim. These were suicide missions, an unsound principle for war. In the final hours before the greatest invasion in history, this stark reality settled heavily upon the glider pilots. In hushed briefings held in damp huts and tents across England, they were shown aerial photos that often bore little resemblance to the treacherous landscape they would encounter. The odds of survival were laid bare, a cold statistical pronouncement against which many scribbled final letters or stared at their clasped hands, the grim certainty of a killing day etched into their faces. They checked their escape kits, emergency supplies, and weapons, a futile ritual against an unfathomable fate. Each man knew that, beyond the thin fabric skin of their powerless craft, lay enemy defenses designed to tear them from the sky. Then came the night. Richard Libby, soaring through the pre-dawn darkness, watched coal-red tracer fire walk down his tow rope, anti-aircraft bursts, rocking his glider fuselage fabric, fluttered away in the Armada's prop wash. The fields below, when they finally appeared, were nothing like the photos. He scraped trees, then crashed hard. In the immediate disorienting aftermath, a voice cut through the ringing in his ears. "Ben's dead." Libby would later confess, "I was so scared that I could not think. The landings were an inferno of chaos." Gliders, many overloaded, plummeted into the dark, their pilots wrestling the controls against unseen obstacles, and a storm of enemy fire, machine gun nests, dug strategically into the very landscape, opened up as the gliders descended, spitting tracers that ripped through fuselages. Second Lieutenant Zane Graves's diary entry captured the raw terror, flak-heavy strings of red beads, orange golf balls. "I'm scared," released in wrong territory, dark, can hardly see, still shooting at us. "Little field, watch those trees pull up dock." Oh, not a bit of the nose left, only part of center of fuselage. The sound of gliders hitting the Normandy hedgerows was made becoming probably and every astes, hitting de can't charge fiesel hulls and an ear. Night of the nose fallage compromented, dark and a canard charge bow. Not a bit of the nose left, only astes was go. As one paratrooper described, sickening. These were not simple hedgerows, they were formidable. 5-foot-high dirt embankments crowned with dense brambles and towering trees, transforming each field into an independent, deadly battlefield. Gliders slammed into them, wings tearing off, equipment smashing, and crews mangles aprose. The sheer violence of impact turned many into instant wreckage, their ribs exposed, like a hapless animal stripped by scavengers. In the immediate aftermath, the volume of war turned up to an unbearable pitch. Machine guns spat, rifles popped, mortars whumped, and artillery exploded. The acrid, gagging smell of gunpowder, mixed with burning farmhouses, glider fabric, and supply crates, filled the air. Inside the wrecked gliders, groans filled the fuselages, calls for medics echoed, and the agonizing squeals of wounded soldiers, like a hog being butchered, cut through the din. Flight Officer Goldie Goldman witnessed the gruesome death of a paratrooper, a chilling testament to the ever-present danger. Bob Horror, crawling from his glider, Mary E., riddled with 80 bullet holes, found his best friend, Claude Buck Jackson, badly wounded. Faced with incoming German mortars and machine gun fire, Horror made the agonizing decision to leave Buck behind, a moment that taught him more in 5 minutes than the army taught me in 2 years. He survived the night, haunted only to learn later that Buck had died. Byron Sharp encountered a pilot who was filleted from his neck almost down to his waist, and another, John Butler, whose face was disfigured after a sniper's bullet detonated ammunition in his glider, leaving him without eyebrows, eyelashes, or hair. Stratton Appleman, whose glider's nose catch failed, forcing a late landing under fire, described a choking terror that made him overwhelmingly sleepy. The landing zones by the next morning were graveyards of gliders, shattered, smoking, hulks, some half submerged in flooded fields, others with wings ripped from fuselages, their fabric skins stripped away. Yet, from this devastation emerged a strategic success. Despite 97% of the gliders being rendered combat incapable, these perilous operations delivered over 4,000 infantry troops of the 101st and 82nd Airborne, along with critically needed equipment, supplies, jeeps, and artillery. This vital payload was essential for establishing the 4th Infantry Division's beachhead and achieving inland objectives, carving out a foothold in Fortress Europe. The experience forged these glider pilots into combat veterans not through traditional infantry training, but through the crucible of shared horrors and profound psychological and physical trauma. Many, like John Hanscom and William Meisberger, found themselves standing guard on Sherman tanks so their crews could rest, navigating an overwhelming uncertainty, improvisation, and confusion that was far removed from their training. Those who survived the landings often spent days fighting alongside paratroopers, guarding German prisoners, or assisting medics before making their way back to the beaches for evacuation to England. They returned forever haunted by what they had witnessed, carrying scars that bind, memories that cripple, sights and sounds that remain as fresh as yesterday, a testament to the immense human cost of proving a concept born of desperation. As the Allied forces pushed eastward, the European continent became a brutal testing ground for the nascent art of glider warfare. Even with the harsh lessons of Normandy still fresh, the summer of 1944 demanded further audacious assaults, each proving more perilous than the last. Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France, on August 15th, was D-5th, on paper, a tactical success. Yet, for the glider pilots, it was less a strategic triumph, and more a descent into an aerial circus, a rodeo of chaos, born from catastrophic planning failures. The preparations in Italy had felt deceptively casual, but veterans like Jack Merrick harbored a gnawing dread, fearing the reconnaissance photos were as poor as those that had led to the Normandy inferno. Their fears were realized. Gliders released at altitude sometimes 5 times higher than expected found themselves not over clear fields but a bewildering maze of misidentified vineyards, invisible high-tension wires and anti-glider poles disguised as innocent wine supports, faulty air traffic control protocols with insufficient spacing between serials turned the sky in support. Merrick vividly recalled gliders as thick as flies around a dead road rabbit, forcing pilots to freelance through a terrifying aerial ballet, desperately trying to avoid collision. The absence of reinforced Griswold noses on most gliders meant that when they inevitably slammed into the unforgiving terrain, the damage was immense and casualties mounted. By nightfall, the landing zones were graveyards of splintered wood and torn fabric. The stench of death hung over the area, mingling with the horrible din of voices calling for medics. Makeshift aid stations, hastily set up in wineries and farmhouses, became scenes of frantic desperation. Staff, often working the jobs of 3, kept awake by taking Benzedrine tablets, battling exhaustion and the constant flow of wounded. Pilots like Joe Hesse and Chester Erickson, after their harrowing landings, found a grim solace in sharing whiskey, digging foxholes, and grappling with the gut-wrenching realities of luck and survival. The next day, as the surviving pilots began their journey back to the beaches for evacuation, they found French residents lining the roads, offering moments of profound humanity amidst the war's detritus. Ben Ward, observing the war's litter of pistols, rifles, and ammunition, reflected on the futility of war. For many, the Champagne campaign was a myth, its swift success bought at a brutal personal cost. Less than a month later, the Allies launched Operation Market Garden, a bold gamble designed to end the war by Christmas. Field Marshal Montgomery's backdoor plan, despite Lieutenant General Browning's prophetic warning, "We may be going a bridge too far," was greenlit on a mere 3-day weather forecast. It was an ambitious undertaking, relying on insufficient intelligence, that fatally underestimated German panzer divisions and a single 2-lane highway that would become a critical bottleneck. The decision for a daytime airborne assault, sacrificed surprise and poor weather, would further complicate the massive Operation Premier. On September 17th, D-Day for Market Garden, the English countryside fractured with a deep growl as the armada of over 400 troop planes and gliders lifted off. It was a spectacle, likened to the precise choreography of an aircraft carrier, a vast airborne carpet stretching 80 miles in 2 flight corridors, masking the inherent dangers and uncertainty of the mission. Soon, thousands of blossoming coloured parachutes began to disgorge into the skies over Holland, but the final 30 miles to the landing zones became a gauntlet of intense flak batteries. The landings were, once again, chaotic and brutal. Gliders, as vulnerable as a roped calf, faced a sky filled with unseen threats. TOW pilot William McCormick's C-47 was hit, rubbery and oily smoke filling the aircraft as flames spread. He executed a nearly vertical dive from 4,000 feet, ditching his burning plane in the ocean and saving his crew, an act that earned him the Distinguished Flying Cross. His glider pilot, First Lieutenant Herb Bollum, saw the smoke and yelled to his men, "Hang on, I see. A field straight ahead." Second Lieutenant Bill Lane watched in horror as his own tow plane took a direct hit, the pilot jumping his collapsed parachute streamered to the ground. Second Lieutenant Noel McCann, flying his glider Clara, was struck by enemy fire that sliced off his left wing, sending his craft into a macabre dance before it plunged from 500 feet, killing him. His friend, Second Lieutenant George Anderson, carrying infantry and explosives, could only press on, deferring the coping with such visions until after the battle. The next day, D+1 brought more tragedy. Normandy veterans Kenneth Hinkle and Adolph Risky, known for their pre-mission jitters and fierce arguments, died in a mid-air collision over their home airfield, bodies spilling from the wreckage like toy soldiers. Over the English Channel, the tow rope of James de Pietro's glider snapped. With the sky just ahead of us seemed to be pitted with little black clouds, where anti-aircraft shells had exploded, Di Pietro calmly recited ditching procedures. His glider hit the water like a breaching whale, but he and his men survived. Second Lieutenant Darlyle Waters's tow rope snapped over German territory, and he was immediately captured by shouting German soldiers. Second Lieutenant Pete Buckley's glider, after its tow plane was hit by shrapnel, landed in a field described as a country dump strewn with wreckage and craters described as a country dump Pradier. Glider pilots, instrumental in delivering approximately 95% of the 101st Airborne's men and cargo and 85% of the 82nds, often became orphans in the crosscurrents of battle. Many faced perilous journeys back to friendly lines or relied on the extraordinary bravery of the Dutch resistance. Brave individuals like 18-year-old Wim Coffins hid downed airmen in barns, attics, hospitals and churches, providing food, water and medical care, even as the fear of reprisal forced some, like a farm wife, to report Allied troops. Wounded men like Second Lieutenant James Swanson found refuge in a hopscotch journey of woods and woodsheds, while Brennan was daringly hidden among pregnant women in a German-occupied town disguised under a tarp topped with wet cow manure. Once on the ground, glider pilots, despite their eagerness, found themselves thrust into prolonged frontline combat, for which they were tragically ill-prepared. Their fundamental lack of battlefield integration, insufficient ground combat training, and poor communication between air and ground forces meant they were often viewed as a liability by ground commanders. General Gavin, seizing the Nijmegen Bridge, starkly articulated this sentiment, noting, "I do not believe there is anyone in the combat area more eager and anxious to do the correct thing, and yet so completely individually and collectively incapable of doing it, than our glider pilots." About the lack of military organization to General Eisenhower, Captain Elgin Andros, an experienced glider officer, found himself leading 100 pilots from his squadron in Major Nevins's frontline deployment, fighting for 36 hours. They dug foxholes, faced German tanks, described as enormous crawling prehistoric monsters, and scavenged for gritty turnips and potatoes, fighting back with Thompson submachine guns during ambushes, the constant artillery barrages and sniper fire, like a June bug flying unnaturally close to private places, and sniper with your Drenskall. Men fell asleep on any level ground after their shifts, while others remained at their posts, amidst the cries of the wounded. The tragic human cost was immense. Flight Officer Ed Walters witnessed the horrific injuries inflicted on his friend Albert Wyatt by sandbags used as glider ballast. Half his face had been torn away, the remainder a bloody pulp. Arms and legs splayed, at impossible angles, white bones protruding from uncounted breaks. Glider infantry frequently laid their flak jackets on the floor of the glider for protection, a grim testament to their vulnerability. Compounding the chaos, communication failures between air and ground forces meant incoming formations often flew over enemy-held territory, leading to further losses. Meant incoming formations expiange on testament to their vulnerability. Compounding the chaos, communication failures between air and ground forces. Critically, bad weather disrupted the planned 3-day operation. On September 21st, Polish infantry reinforcements for Arnhem were delayed, with only half the transports making it, a factor that directly contributed to the loss of the Arnhem Bridge on September 20th, a critical objective. By September 24th, glider pilots received orders to disengage and head back to England, their direct involvement in the most intense phases over. The evacuation was chaotic, with pilots navigating ambush truck convoys or hitchhiking to safety. For some, like Flight Officer Guy Anderson, a former coal miner and baseball player, the journey ended in capture, and the grim reality of Stalag Luft, the Operation Market Garden, ultimately failed to achieve its ambitious goals, serving as a stark lesson in the complexities and immense risks of large-scale airborne operations. The blackened skeletons of trucks and tanks, still smouldering, and the weedless patches of churned dirt, marking freshly dug graves, served as somber reminders of the human cost and the house of cards blown asunder. The failure of Operation Market Garden, a house of cards blown asunder, left the Allied advance stalled and the war far from over. Back. As winter clamped down on Europe, in December 1944, Hitler, in a desperate gamble, launched a surprise offensive through the Ardennes. Allied intelligence, still reeling from the Dutch debacle, profoundly underestimated the German strength, allowing 44 skeletal divisions, bolstered by 1,000 takes to punch, to the American line's phrase. The harshest winter in 2 decades became an unwitting ally to the Germans, cloaking their advance in heavy snow and bitter winds, creating a vast bulge in the Allied front. Caught in the heart of this creeping desperation was Bastogne, a vital crossroads where 7 roads converged. The 101st Airborne, surrounded by an estimated 45,000 Germans, found itself cut off from all ground and air resupply, while General McAuliffe's terse nuts response to a German surrender ultimatum resonated with American grit. Internal communications painted a far grimmer picture, implicitly debunking any bravado. Bastogne was truly desperate. Food, fuel, and, most critically, ammunition and medical supplies dwindled. Surgeons worked in a converted garage, described by Captain Edward Zinschlag as stepping into hell, a fused fog of rancid almond, ammonia, and the unique sweetness of dying flesh, where low moans filled the semi-darkness. Initial airdrops of parachuted supplies offered some relief, but they were insufficient for specialized needs, like medical personnel and heavy artillery. The decision was made to send gliders, a mission beyond their traditional troop-carrying role, into a besieged pocket under intense enemy fire. On December 26th, gliders braved the solid wall of flak, delivering medical teams and thousands of gallons of gasoline. But the true crucible came the next day. December 27th, Operation Repulse became a day of disproportionate and devastating loss for glider pilots. 50 gliders were dispatched to deliver 76 tons of artillery ammunition and additional surgeons, flying at an agonizingly low 400 feet to avoid German 88mm fire. This made them clay pigeons on a straight, predictable path, a carnival shooting gallery for German anti-aircraft guns. The mission was unexcusable for unprepared, as one report stated, citing inadequate intelligence and the lack of basic safety equipment, like flak suits. "You can't imagine what it was like," Flight Officer Verborn Hauk recounted. "You know how a goose feels when he flies over a bunch of hunters and they start shooting. The losses were catastrophic, 26% of tow planes shot down, nearly 1 in 5 C-47 crewmen lost, and a staggering 32% of glider pilots killed or captured. 18 of 25 gliders failed to reach their landing zone. Those who survived the crashes often faced a grim new reality. Flight Officer Pershing Carlson, after his glider went down, hid for 5 days and nights in the snow, surviving on frozen potatoes and turnips before his capture. Flight Officer Mike Sheff, flying the last glider that day, was captured identified as Jewish and endured a forced march of over 500 miles through the snow to a Polish POW camp, suffering unimaginable malnutrition. Richard Fort, upon his return, drove through destroyed villages, past stacks of German bodies, like cordwood, and found an old man and woman with blank grey eyes in a ruined house. Back at base, one pilot found his hut occupied by replacements, furiously drove them out, then sat down on his cot and cried for his friends. General Eisenhower himself would later concede that, had it not been for air as supply, the situation would have become worse than desperate. It would have been untenable. The Battle of the Bulge, though a costly initial German success, ultimately depleted their resources, hastening their final defeat and setting the stage for the Allied push to the Rhine. As January 1945 saw German forces withdraw, the Allied armies pressed to the western bank of the Rhine, preparing for the final decisive assault into the heart of Germany. Operation Varsity, planned since November 1944, would be the largest single-day airborne attack in history, a pivotal push towards Berlin. But the enemy knew they were coming. Axis Sally broadcast a chilling warning. "We know you are coming, 17th Airborne Division. You will not need parachutes. You can walk down on the flak." Colonel Frank Krebs addressed his men. "Gentlemen, this mission is the beginning of the end. Tomorrow we land gliders in Germany." For veterans, the haunting memories of Normandy and Market Garden fueled the battle of nerves. For first-timers, self-doubt was a constant companion. Flight Officer Goldman, remembering a friend lost in a training accident, prayed intensely before Varsity. It seemed appropriate, even necessary, when no man could predict his fate. Varsity involved over 17,000 airborne troops, £7 million of equipment, and over 1,200 vehicles. A risky innovation, the first-time use of double towers in battle, intended to increase efficiency, tragically introduced significant risk. During takeoff, flight officers William Heelas and Leonard Hyman died when their tow rope strangled the tail assembly, grinding and screeching as it cut through the glider's frame, sending their glider plummeting. The flight path was a coordinated ballet of war, but the descent on March 24th was a harrowing ordeal. While low-level chemical smoke screens were tactically sound for concealment, the resulting whitish-grey haze drifted into the landing zones, turning planned visual approaches into blind descents amidst a storm of enemy fire. Gliders disappeared in the smog, forcing pilots to rely on timing and aircrew cues. The ground erupted with the high-pitched screams of 88mm shells, the ek of German burp guns, and the hollow whumps of mortars. This concentrated anti-aircraft fire specifically targeted the vulnerable gliders, turning them into candles burning from a giant birthday cake as they descended. The sheer intensity of the onslaught was brutal. Every 9 minutes, a glider pilot on approach was killed. Pilots like Roger Cree and Bill Lane survived a direct hit from a 20mm shell, shrapnel slicing through them, yet Lane calmly stated, "We'll go under it," guiding their crippled glider. Last-second decision to crash land between trees and a canal into a feedlot, encouraged by a shouting soldier, "You're gonna make it." Harry Dunhoft, a power pilot in the co-pilot First Lieutenant Frank Blood, was hit, grunting, "It's all yours." Dunhoft bravely navigated the descent, and Frank Blood was hit, relying on a severely wounded airborne soldier whose kneecap had been shot away, calling out airspeeds. First Lieutenant Dick Redfern later mourned his friend Fred Doherty, whose glider exploded, leaving only just the 2 wingtips fluttering down. Flight Officer Delmar Switzer landed wounded, his glider immediately destroyed by artillery, leading another pilot to grimly hope. He was dead before he burned. Even Edwin Blanche, who had reassured his wife that he wasn't in a lot of danger, was killed after successfully landing a howitzer. Upon landing, the pilots and their passengers were immediately thrust into intense firefights. Exiting a glider meant crawling over cargo or fallen comrades to reach the windows, finding themselves potentially surrounded by the enemy. The acrid, gagging smell of gunpowder mixed with burning farmhouses, glider fabric and supply crates filled the air. At Burp Gun Corner, Flight Officer Albert Geller fired a bazooka at an approaching German tank. Flight Officer Bernard Smith graphically recounted losing his leg in a crash, then, Bachionius time, to bear. Despite his injuries, killing 2 German soldiers, an act that caused him profound internal conflict, even a month later. Flight officers Donald Martin and Ken Moore, sharing a foxhole, killed a German soldier in the dark, an act that caused Moore profound lingering guilt and a desire to distance himself from glider pilots. Gordon Chamberlain was killed by a sniper, just 5 days short of his 24th birthday. Boots King, known for his humorous complaints about military food, suffered severe burns and died, a poignant loss that belied his vibrant pre-war persona. By nightfall on March 24th, the cost was staggering. 86 glider pilots were killed, in approximately 12 hours, representing nearly 40% of all glider pilot deaths in World War II, and more than the combined losses in Operations Neptune and Market Garden. The next day revealed graveyards of gliders, a killing killed of mangled gliders, smouldering, their scorched metal ribs and charred fabric becoming carrion for local scavengers, while Operation Varsity was a decisive tactical success, enabling the crucial Rhine crossing and significantly advancing the Allied push towards Berlin. It came at an extraordinary high and often overlooked human cost for the glider pilots of political career. Their disproportionate and devastating losses, the unique challenges, and the profound psychological toll they endured implicitly debunked any notion that their operations were less dangerous. March 24th marked the final major combat mission for gliders in the European theatre, a testament to their immense bravery and catastrophic sacrifice in securing the path to victory. As the final shots echoed across Europe, in the spring of 1945, the gliders, those silent, vulnerable workhorses of the skies, had flown their last major combat missions. But for the pilots, the war was far from over. Many transitioned into the cockpits of C-47s, flying critical gas, pipeline missions across the battered continent, delivering supplies to ravaged towns and evacuating the wounded and newly liberated prisoners of war. Even as these vital logistical flights continued, military strategists were already mapping out Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Radical ideas for glider use persisted, including the audacious concept of explosive rigged gliders to clear landing zones in Japan's densely cultivated landscape. It was a testament to the glider's perceived utility, even as the world hurtled towards a new era of warfare. Then, with an unimaginable flash and a mushroom cloud over Hiroshima, the landscape of global conflict was fundamentally altered. The advent of nuclear weapons rendered conventional large-scale invasions, especially those relying on vulnerable, unpowered aircraft, suddenly obsolete. The very doctrine that had given birth to the glider program did about. When the U.S. Air Force was formally established in 1947, its focus on strategic bombing and powered flight left the glider pilots, those Sherpas of World War II, without a clear command structure, effectively orphaning them from the military family they had served with such audacious courage. Their craft, once hailed as America's first stealth aircraft, swiftly faded into the annals of military history, declared obsolete by the Joint Airborne Troop Board in 1952. The grim nicknames they had earned during their service, Purple Heart Box, Plywood Hearse, Flying Box Kite, were not just macabre jokes, they were stark reminders for Ashizines of the inherent danger and high casualty rates of their one-way missions behind enemy lines in defenseless aircraft. Yet, in the immediate post-war period, their contributions were largely unacknowledged, their immense bravery often overlooked. They were the only aviators of World War II who flew into combat, with no motors, no parachutes, and never of nears, a developable, computed. No second chances, expected to fight as infantrymen after their do-or-die landings. General William C. Westmoreland would later affirm that they were no ordinary fighters whose duty was to deliberately crash land and then go on to fight as combat infantrymen. This profound sacrifice implicitly debunked any notion that they were not real combat pilots whose duty was to deliberately crash land. Indeed, their missions were so hazardous that they earned an air medal for each glider mission, a far higher rate than bomber or fighter pilots. Yet their heroism was sometimes underestimated by Army headquarters, as evidenced by General Mark Clark's rejection of Silver Star recommendations for pilots like Samuel Fine, who had helped secure the Ponte Grande Bridge in Sicily. War correspondent Walter Cronkite, who flew a glider mission, expressed immense respect for these remarkable people who not only trained to do this very thing, they were prepared to turn around and do it again and again. The war left an indelible mark on these men. Some, like Roger Cree, found profound personal growth, calling the army the best experience of my life, and a period of intense growing. For many, the camaraderie forged in the crucible of shared terror and survival became a lifelong bond. Tragically, even after the fighting ceased, the cost continued. 9 glider pilots died in a B-24 crash 2 months after the war in Europe ended, headed home to their families, a final poignant loss of comrades. For countless others, the war left deep psychological scars that bind, memories that cripple but head rate, sights and sounds that remain as fresh as yesterday. They carried mood swings of depression, mourning, exhilaration at survival, survivor's guilt, pride in mission accomplished, and the haunting question of whether the next mission would have a bullet with my name on it. Thousands of these pilots, who had flown into the heart of enemy territory, his midget had flown into the heart of enemy territory in Page pride, and quote, blended back into American society as, silently as they had landed, pursuing careers from minister to cartographer, lawyer to horse breeder. It wasn't until 1995, decades after the war, that the Air Force awarded bronze medals to members of the 435th Provisional Glider Pilots Infantry Company, a long overdue gesture of recognition where, today, the legacy of these glider pilots, one of extreme audacity, accomplishment and anonymity, is being meticulously preserved. Institutions like the Silent Wings Museum, curated by Sharon McCullough, archive over 100,000 files, ensuring their unique stories are not lost. The World War II Glider Pilots Committee, with research team member Patricia Overman, also contributes significantly to this preservation, gathering personal accounts and artifacts. It is through these efforts that the profound human impact of their service continues to resonate. Samuel Fine, for instance, spent 50 years searching for his British pilot, Staff Sergeant Lofty Wilkner, killed at the Ponte Grande Bridge, finally visiting his grave in 1997 to say goodbye. William Brown's poignant, unsent letter to his son, penned before D-Day, serves as a testament to the love and sacrifice that underpinned their courage. The discovery of Jack Merrick's lost helmet in a French museum, found by a 12-year-old boy in the rubbish of war, connects generations to a tangible piece of history. And the adopted graves of men like Gordon Chamberlain in the Netherlands American Cemetery, tended by Dutch citizens like Mary Kinnickney, highlight the enduring gratitude and personal connection that transcends borders and time. These stories, once whispered among veterans, are now shared with future generations, ensuring that the courage and sacrifice of the G for Guts glider pilots will inspire long after their silent wings have ceased to fly.